Thank you.
The special meeting on the quasi-judicial proceedings around the Salish expansion is now open. With that, I'll turn it over to the city attorney to kick things off.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a continuation of our the council's previous meetings, which, as we've noted, are all part of a quasi-judicial proceeding in which the council acts more like a judge in determining whether an application in front of it meets the legal criteria than as opposed to its usual role in a legislative capacity. So I have polled council members with a series of questions from time to time. I won't repeat all of those now, other than to ask each council member to indicate whether the answers to any of them in terms of your relationships or employment or interest in the property, whether any of those have changed. I can go down from the last meeting. Councilmember Jeans?
No change.
Councilmember Ross?
No change.
Councilmember Holloway?
No change.
Councilmember Mayhew?
No change.
Councilmember Lassay?
No change.
Councilmember Sundball?
No change.
Councilmember Shepherd?
No change.
Thank you. And then more specifically, whether you've had any ex parte or off-the-record communications with proponents or opponents of the project since the last time the council met on this issue. Councilmember Jeans?
None.
Councilmember Ross?
Well, I attended an Economic Development Commission, and basically it's just more of an update that Mr. Hoffman provided to the EDC. And it's just stating that it's gone from the Planning Commission, and now it's in the council hands, and it's going to include 182 rooms, just information like that, but there was no discussion about the pros and cons.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Holloway?
None.
Councilmember Mayhew?
None.
Councilmember Lassay?
During last Monday's Planning Commission meetings, one of the planning commissioners addressed a question to me surrounding the affordable housing and fee in lieu proposition. He indicated that he was wholly supportive of a fee in lieu, and I indicated to him that that was not a question or a comment that I could make regarding that, as this is a quasi-judicial situation, so that was the end of the conversation. Mr. Hoffman was in presence at the same time. So,
okay, thank you. Councilmember Sundwall?
No.
Councilmember Shepherd?
No.
We have representatives of the applicant present. Just would ask whether there's any desire to seek disqualification of any council member at this time based on the representations this evening.
Harry Danish on behalf of the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe, none.
All right, thank you. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my role on the colloquy, and I would turn it back either to you or Mr. Rogers.
All right, thank you, Bob. With that, Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Got it. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So you all have in front of you a paper copy of the issue matrix, which was distributed last week. Just to reference for you, I'll be referring to the issue matrix as well as the Planning Commission's resolution, the Planning Commission issue matrix, and the development agreement most of the time. Some other things in the record might come up, and then we can flip to the right tab if you really want to look at it. But my intent tonight is to just start going through the issue matrix, the council's issue matrix, that is, one by one, and we'll move through it, hopefully close some issues out, and try to move through all of these as you know, as efficiently as we can. You've got tonight and two other scheduled workshops coming up. So the first question was about tree retention. How would the project remove and retain trees? There's a description here that talks about that. There's an answer to the initial question, which was from from about a month ago, and then there's an update answer in response to some more clarifications from 2 weeks ago. The update answer refers to an exhibit in Appendix A drawings, and it's about midway through those drawings, which are in your binder, of course. So the real question is, does this answer adequately address specifically Councilmember Shepherd's question, but also I know a couple other council members had some concerns about trees. So if this is good, we can close the issue out. If you want to discuss it or ask some more questions, we're perfectly happy to do that.
Councilmember Sundwall?
So I apologize for not being here last time, but I was able to watch
all the proceedings on video, so a lot of the questions I had were asked by my fellow council members, which was great. When this question came up, I couldn't help but be reminded that based on the presentation that the Muckleshoots had made, they want to keep every single tree possible. And so while I don't think the plans show every single tree that will stay or go, I think my general impression from what they demonstrated is they are highly incentivized to keep, because of the feel they want to create, as many of the trees as possible, which I think is in alignment with what we hope they do. So that's not a definitive binding feeling that they have, but my sense is that was what their intent is.
Yeah, I think it's a fair recollection of what the applicant has stated and what their plans show going forward, but.
Councilman Slade?
This was sort of in line with tree retention, but I think it's more towards views. Is that another one there? I think number 4 is views.
Yeah, views is addressed a little later. I mean, they do kind of go hand in hand, I'll admit.
Yeah, I'll ask the question at this point, just so we can have, or at least start the discussion on it. I think the concern I have with tree retention is that there's a, desire to remove only the trees necessary, but we're creating a couple large, or an additional large parking lot down the hill from the development and in the meadow area. And I haven't seen anything other than a PowerPoint representation of views that aren't based upon, what's actually there. It's all computer generated, and it'd be good to get some representation of what you would see from the falls, what you'd see from the observation deck based upon actual imagery, and I'm not sure I saw that yet.
So specific to your question, the record's closed, and so the visual representations we have are what's available on the record.
Can you point me to where those are located again, then?
Yes, they are in.
Have line of sight. Diagrams in there. I want to find it again.
They're going to make me look.
It's in part of the plan. It's in one of the planning commission packets, isn't it? I couldn't find it.
So Appendix B, View Analysis. This is in the application materials, so it'll be an early tab. They look like. It looks like this.
Why can't our book be that small?
Your book is smaller because we try to make everything letter size to fit better. The full-size PDFs are on the web page we distributed. You're certainly welcome to look at a paper copy. We even have a bigger version of this upstairs.
Yes, the thing is, I've seen these, and I've looked at these, but it's showing me a dot, and it's not showing me buildings.
So,
And buildings across the landscape will come and go between trees as density changes. And so it's unclear how that is represented, that a dot from a drone represents a large development through trees.
So I believe what the applicant was trying to show with these, the dot, it shows a drone flying 100 feet high. And so when they flew a drone to 55 feet, which is the highest elevation of the hotel as shown in the drawings, you can't see the drone. It's lost in the trees. When you fly, you have to fly the drone up to 100 feet tall above the trees to even see it. So that's what they're trying to demonstrate, is that a 100-foot tall structure, or in this case a drone, would certainly be visible, but something down at 55 feet is not visible because it's in the trees.
Well, I recognize that, but that's for one location. These buildings will span hundreds of feet. So it's hard to tell without, that if that's actually going to be achievable. That the idea that they will not, to make the statement that it will not be visible from the falls, I think is presumptuous until it's done.
I mean, I think the tree cover extent, because you can see in the arcs that they've got, it shows the field of view. And within that field of view, if you look at the photos, is sufficient to, you're not going to see something
I see it here, and I see it, you could see it across a wide breadth, that's why
right. And that's where
it won't be visible, but it's visible there.
Well, and that's where the cross-section also comes into play a little more, because from the falls viewpoint, which is the second one, topography gets in your way as well. And so the topography is going to screen the building. From the end of the pedestrian bridge, topography is still partly a factor. It's less of a factor, but between the topography and the trees, they're demonstrating, you only need about, you don't need super tall trees to sufficiently screen at that point. So that's what the drawing is showing.
Just back on the topic of tree retention, it's unclear from this which trees are going to be removed and which ones are going to be kept to know if this is an accurate representation. So I can take some of it on faith, but at the same time, without a description of what trees would be removed in building the lower parking lot, in building them, in doing the meadow, it's unclear whether the same look will be the same when the project is done.
The meadow is actually a restoration of the upper parking lot, is it not?
In general, yes.
It's partly, yes.
So, one thing the council could consider as part of this is that the Planning Commission's current recommended condition, which is 3E, states the project shall not be visible from Snoqualmie Falls. There's no condition specifically relating to tree retention right now. One thing the council could consider is a condition relating to tree retention, whether it's a more qualitative assessment similar to the conceptual tree plan that's shown in the application materials, or something more specific if that's the path you want to go down. We don't have to flesh that out in full right this second.
Right.
Something to think about.
Bob?
And I just would make the other observation that it's important to focus on what's in the record and what it shows and what's not in the record. And so, for example, there isn't anything in the record that I'm aware of that shows that the hotel will be visible or that there will be view impacts. And so you're talking about proving a negative here, but you're also needing to make sure your decision is based on the record. So just offer that in general. No one from the public or the Snoqualmie tribe, for example, added any information in the record showing, well, there will be A, B, or C view impact. The only information that is in the record specifically about view impacts is the view study and the materials submitted by the applicant.
Councilmember Holloway?
Well, could we consider or at least ask condition that says blocking foliage is retained to the extent of being a solid view blockage when viewed from?
That would be the kind of language that you could consider for the kind of condition that Mr. Rogers was just outlining.
Councilmember Shipp?
So I'm looking at the Snoqualmie Tribe's letter, and they do talk about view shed. So they did bring that up in the documents that we have for the record.
Right, they brought it up, but they didn't provide any evidence that there would be views. I'm sorry, that there would be view impacts. I think their letter talks about they'd like to see a broader view analysis, but they didn't establish that there would be. And they didn't, for example, conduct a view analysis of their own.
Councilmember Sunwell?
So we're spending a lot of time talking about views. Is there something in some agreement somewhere that says it's not allowed to be seen by the falls?
No, there's nothing in the development agreement that says anything about that.
So that sounds like it's a nice to have by one or more members of the city council.
It's a
Condition.
in the context of the master plan, and it's kind of a nice to have, but the other what the condition that's the Plan Commission recommends is directly trying to address is to avoid potential visual impacts to the Snoqualmie Falls traditional cultural property.
Well, actually, it's a, sorry. Mayor.
Councilmember Lasay?
You just mentioned it, condition 3E is a recommended condition from the Planning Commission is that the project shall not be visible from Snoqualmie Falls. So it's not a nice to have, it's a condition that we're considering.
It's a recommendation that we can or can choose not to abide by.
Yes.
Just like the hotel. Right?
Yeah. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's.
Councilmember Ross?
I thought there was a condition in Snoqualmie Ridge Plan 1 for that, because there are certain homes you cannot build two-story because you'd be able to see them from the falls. So I think that already exists.
Correct. There is a condition in the SR1 and actually in the Snoqualmie Ridge 2 as well, that certain homes in certain areas cannot be visible from the falls because they're on the ridge that overlooks the falls. So So that condition has certainly been enforced over time.
As I recall, it was very specific from the viewing platform at the falls, or at least the former one.
Yeah, I can't recall the specifics of the condition without the documents, and they're strictly speaking not part of the record, but certainly that condition exists. And so it's not unprecedented.
From the falls, you can't see anything on this hill. All you see is the Salish Lodge behind you, so there'd have to be some definition of from where are you looking. Councilmember Mayhew?
Just a question about what's in the record specifically from the Snoqualmie tribe. Did they raise a concern about being able to view any of these buildings from the, I'm going to stumble over the terminology just like you just did, the tribal area, the
TCP.
TCP. Did they raise that as a concern in the record?
As Councilmember Shepherd mentioned, they do raise that in their letter. The potential view impacts topic is raised. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't recall if they say specifically from the TCP. But I think it was more a general comment along the lines of they acknowledge the applicant submitted certain materials. They're not sure that the analysis took into account as many possible viewpoints as it could, or something to that effect, and maybe Jason can put his fingers on it.
That answers my question. That's all. And so the proposed condition from the Planning Commission would be to address that concern.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
TCP as defined by the viewing platform
Uh-huh.
and the flat area at the end of
Thank you.
western
Right. Thank you,
extent of
Jason.
the bridge.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't want to speak for
Yeah,
anybody
please give them the
else.
microphone so we can.
I don't want to speak for anything
Over
else. The
again, Mark.
record, their letter is in there, but the key being, thank you. If somebody uses the word Snoqualmie Falls, we need to define it specifically. And for us, it's the viewing platform and then the flat landing area on the west side of the access bridge.
And does the Planning Commission's proposed condition pick up that
Yes.
definition?
And so from the viewing platform, topography blocks that possibility. From the landing near the bridge, topography and trees. So that's why we've had prior discussion about a condition, not only requiring it, but through substantial conformance and so forth, showing evidence that at that location, that those trees remain. What the conversation led to was a potential condition and the wording related to that, tree retention, to ensure that topography plus trees would block it from that location. But if someone's using Snoqualmie Falls in general, there are many places on that site where you will see structures across the road. Standing at the Salish Hotel is one of them. You will see glimpses of hotel through the trees. That's why we want to differentiate it.
Right. So as far as the concern that was raised, I'm just trying to get clear. So I appreciate all the information you just shared. I'm just trying to get the idea that the Planning Commission's proposed condition, is that the right terminology? Their proposed condition, they believe to be responsive to the question of visibility from the falls.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm looking at the letter, and it says, based on the Army Corps of Engineers' understanding of the significance of the Snoqualmie Falls to the Snoqualmie Indian tribe and the nature of the permitted activities, the Corps has determined that the construction of the Tokal Road roundabout will adversely affect the integrity of the Snoqualmie Falls TCP. The nature of this particular project is more destructive to the area than the Tokal roundabout was, and thus a greater potential to negatively impact Snoqualmie Falls. So that's kind of.
So I know you didn't specifically ask the question, but the response that the city's already provided is that the Snoqualmie tribe is asserting impacts without evidence. They're asserting that the Salish expansion project would have greater impacts than the Tokal roundabout without citing evidence to support that. Certainly the Tokal roundabout, and the Tokal roundabout is a separate project that has certain well-documented impacts that were mitigated. There's a whole cultural resources plan for the Tokal roundabout project, which is incorporated in this as in the SEPA addendum for this project. So without evidence from the Snoqualmie tribe of what the potential impacts may or may not be, the city's unable to respond other than to say, we did SEPA analysis on this. We placed a condition on this to address potential visual impacts to the falls TCP. There's nothing more, it's not that there's nothing more we can do, but tell us what other impacts. If they want to assert another impact, they would provide evidence that we could then use to craft additional conditions or perform additional analysis. That hasn't happened. I can assert lots of things in the letter, I think is the more flippant way of saying it. But it doesn't mean anything I assert in the letter is true. And that's not to dismiss what the Snoqualmie tribe is necessarily asserting in their letter, but they need to provide evidence to back that up.
I think their letter is asking for more discussion about this.
Okay, I guess with no other questions, we can conclude our
So my question to the council then,
facetious, but yeah.
my question to the council then is, it seems like your discussion is over for now. Would you like staff to look at a potential condition regarding trees and tree retention, or would you prefer to close this issue without that condition?
Can't we just use the condition that was provided by the Planning Commission and
Yes.
call that good?
Yes, that's
We
certainly
either
an option.
accept that or we reject it.
Well, it's recommended. One additional level may be that project implementation is one phase. Once the project's there, over time, projects change. So would you want to investigate some sort of a long-term permanent retention? So let's say 372 trees are there, you build a hotel and the residential, and we achieve the requirements. The master plan and substantial conformance is the only tool that ensures through time that site doesn't change. Whether it's in the 10th year or 15th year, let's say they even sell it and somebody else has something else in mind. The reason staff raised that condition and additional wording is if you wanted to explore some other means of retention long-term. We have faith that it'll be achieved with project implementation, with the Planning Commission recommendation as stated. We can achieve that as a condition. But past that, that was the uncompleted portion of staff's discussion.
Councilor Lasay?
Just to read the condition so that we have it. Condition 3E was projects shall not be visible from the Snoqualmie Falls observation deck or from within the Snoqualmie Falls Park at the western end of the pedestrian walkway over SR 202. So it's definitely very specific to those two locations.
Well, that's pretty broad if they included the entire park.
Well, it says, no, it's
Two locations.
That landing on the other side of the bridge.
western, it just says western end of the pedestrian walkway.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So we're very confident we can achieve that.
So what you're saying, Mark, is that I read that to me, that's how it's always going to be, not just when we give them the certificate of occupancy, right? Are you saying that that is not the case?
No, we were inviting additional detail in a condition to protect against the future. The conversation, as I remember it, was with Councilmember Lasay about if you remove some of the trees, we have strong winds here. Trees change over time. Some will die naturally, some will get blown over. Or they want to add a feature in the 7th year that requires 2 trees to go. The process we have right now is conformance with the master plan, which is a high level. The conversation we had at the prior city council was how do we achieve much more detail, and would the applicant be amenable to a stronger condition? That's where the conversation left off. So for the purposes of this workshop, either some sort of straw poll that you're satisfied with the condition as recommended by the Planning Commission, or that you want to add some wording that takes it into the future. Trees change over time.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Holloway.
So I know that we have some language that talks about inventorying trees. Is it possible for us to put something in there to inventory significant trees and to require a permit for them to remove a significant tree?
That's certainly a condition the council could consider. We don't have a good process for that in the code right now, so it would be something we'd have to mull over and craft some language that would work. But certainly we could do that.
Councilmember Holloway.
Two things. One, global warming, everything else, I'm reluctant to say you will always maintain 100% view blockage on infinitum in case a hurricane comes through here, okay? But I could see where we could ask for basically a forest management plan for the site to maintain those trees and to manage them appropriately moving forward, okay? That's at least an ongoing active thing. Second point, though, we bantered about TCP. I don't believe that there is an agreed definition of TCP.
There is actually, in the eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places, which I did put in the
Yeah.
record, the falls TCP are the falls themselves, the plunge pool at the bottom, and the rim.
And I got the
rock
impression
rim.
the
So-
Snoqualmie tribe had a much more expansive definition of TCP.
They would like that definition to be larger than it is, but that is the current legal definition of.
Joint party agreement.
It's as determined by the keeper of the National Register of Historic Places that accepted the nomination back in 1991. That's who determined the scope of the
My point is, when
TCP.
when the Snoqualmie tribe says TCP, they may not be restrictive to that definition, that more restrictive definition. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Point of clarification, just for an order of business, council, I want to emphasize, I want to be sure that if there's a condition or recommendation made by council, that it's supported by a majority of the council and not. So I just want to back up one step. Councilmember Shepherd just stated maybe exploring some sort of a significant tree stipulation. I think we did have something like that on SR1. I saw you taking notes, so I'm not sure, it's not clear to me where that's going. Are you not chasing that down? Or
So I'll say the three things I've heard is keep the current condition alone that the Planning Commission recommended, 3E. Councilmember Shepherd said to consider a tree retention plan for significant trees along with the policies about, or a process rather, for tree removals. And Councilmember Holloway mentioned a forest management plan. So those seem to be the three I've got so far.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, council, just before we move on to other comments. Jason, I'm trying to clarify. This could quickly become a Christmas tree full of ornaments if just one member on the council says, do this, another one says, do that, and this becomes a big, a lot of ornaments hanging on this tree. I need some.
So what we can do is
You're the one that's going to be having to chase down all these ornaments. So if you don't want to be chasing down 100 ornaments,
so
I want to ask you to help give me some help. You're guiding this to where
So
it
I'll
gives
say
you
is
clear
if-
direction on.
So if all 7 of you are okay with it, I can take those, really two options I have to really do work on. Come back next time and see what the council's pleasure is on those options.
Yeah, and I need a sense that there's a majority that supports each of those options.
There's one missing, I thought. I thought there was one that had been mentioned that was missing, and that was the idea that there would require a permit of some sort to be issued or granted before a tree could be cut down. Does
That's in Councilmember Shepherd's idea. So-
Okay.
Councilmember Mayhew.
So, and then we have the fourth idea of the Christmas tree, I guess, with the ornaments on it.
We don't do fourth ideas.
Oh, that's right. We're all against the fourth idea. Just following up on this idea that was raised about significant trees, I guess, I was looking around the room, I don't think we have our arborist here, so you may not know the answer, but I guess I had the idea that, a forest that's only 50 years, that there really isn't, the notion of significant trees wouldn't really exist in that, but can you comment on that?
So we would likely be looking to use an existing definition of significant tree, which I don't recall what it is in the code right now. It's either 6 or 8 inches diameter at breast height. How that relates to the trees on the side, I could not say. So it's something we would have to consider, and I will consider. I'll go out and take a quick gander through the site to see, how that might work, because to Councilmember Shepherd's idea, but we'll figure it out.
So I guess that my reaction was, as I was hearing that, is I heard some concerns about being able to view what you'd be able to see from, I'll just say the falls, by which I mean in particular, the tribal area that's of importance to the Snoqualmie tribe, but the falls generally. And I get the idea that, I guess I'm not clear on how much this tree cover topic is important to that. I get the feeling that what the applicants proposed would adequately address this. Now, if there's some significant trees, that seems like an additional sort of different topic that I'm interested in. If we have trees like that, I'd be curious if that's something we can or should be looking at, or what the applicant would think about that. But if there aren't any, then I guess that goes away. But, you know, I think we're on this visibility issue. And so I guess my thought is, unless we're hearing that there's some problem with visibility, it seems to me anyway that what the Planning Commission proposed seems adequate.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, the thing that they've made clear is that they can't guarantee a tree will survive. And I thought that perhaps if we went through the process, there's a form that they use for King County when you're getting ready to clear a lot, where you do inventory trees that are significant. And at least it would give us one line of defense to try to preserve as many trees as we can. At least give us a chance to have a say on what's cleared. And, you know, for natural causes, trees can fall down, but we can't do anything about that.
Councilmember Holloway.
So I guess so we already have a significant tree ordinance, I believe, or at least controls.
We have a definition of significant trees. We don't really implement that.
We have design criteria highly encouraging and requiring preservation of mature landscaping, and a definition.
And I would just, for the council's consideration, you know, you have a site plan in front of you that has building footprints on it. And I would, if you're going to go towards some sort of permit regime, I would caution against setting up a scenario where you approve a site plan with certain buildings and then put permits in front of it that would potentially deny what you approved, or give someone the ability to argue that that's what you did. That you'll want to be very clear about defining where trees may be cleared and where if that's the level of detail you want to get to, that you get to that, or that if you want to do it, as Mr. Hoffman previously described, more generally, preserve, or I think maybe, was it Councilmember Holloway, preserve, you know, an opaque landscape screen or something like that, but so that you don't have a decision that's at conflict with itself.
And that's why staff believes we can achieve it with project implementation through the use of the conceptual tree preservation plan. But it's at a high master level. What happens to the individual trees after is what we're asking for specific feedback. So we would recommend sticking with the Planning Commission condition as shown. We would implement the project design to address the issue that the city attorney just raised through the conceptual tree preservation plan. That would authorize removal of those trees. Then you have a project that's there, trees are there. Do you want one extra level to ensure that over time trees do not start one by one disappearing and diminish the view protection that you put in place?
I mean, that was my concern too. I'm just trying to look for specificity for Jason's sake on, I mean, if you approve a site plan or general concept plan, and then you find that there's several significant trees, is the council asking them to redesign the hotel around those trees? That would be my concern. So, Councilmember Mayhew?
Well, I was just going to say, it seems like we've got some questions here that can be looked into. I feel it may be time for us to move on from this topic tonight, knowing we'll revisit it when we get a little more information. I'm having a hard time seeing the problem here when we've got an ordinance that says 35% open space, and here we've got a proposal that's at like 65+%. I'm just having a hard time understanding what the concern is with and so maybe you could help us through answering some of these questions that have been asked to understand, are there some significant tree issues and just help us understand this issue a little better, or I think we're going to start spinning our wheels.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark, and then we'll go to
Thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
So tonight, we weren't prepared to draft a condition, but we certainly have enough feedback to go get some wording and bring it back to the next workshop.
Councilmember Holloway?
So, having thought here, and I went down the same path. We're having a lot of discussion of how, and I think that's probably inappropriate. The discussion should be what, and I think the what is, we want some method under which the view shading of the site from the spot specified in the conditions is maintained. How they do it, it's up to them, just, we should have covenants, whatever it says, that is maintained.
But isn't that 3E already?
3E is initial. When the site is built, it will be shielded.
And
Looking
it
for something that
pertains to
says
time.
5 years from now, it will also not be visible.
The master plan will still be in place, but once you build the project, things like master plans disappear. When you're out there on a Thursday afternoon making a decision on a tree, I guarantee the last thing that guy's going to think of is, I better go to the city and review the master plan. So that's why we're looking for that extra level of detail if the council wants it.
To
Is the majority of council amenable to that recommendation of Mark's to have them work on some language to that regard? Basically, it's kind of a protective language to assure that it's maintained in the future.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mayhew?
I'm not sure what you asked us to agree to. Right now, I'm yet to understand why anything beyond what the Planning Commission recommended is needed.
The only thing is if it's in perpetuity.
Oh, just to make that in perpetuity. Oh, okay. Now I get it. Thank you.
To protect it in perpetuity.
Got it. Thank you.
After no one's paying attention to the mixed-use final plan
Got
anymore.
it.
Once a day.
Appurtenance and perpetuity.
In perpetuity.
Councilmember Holloway?
No, moving on after that, just moving on. I'm ready to go to the next one. Yeah. You got action for that.
All right. Now, next one, parking. And so there's 3 general parking issues. The first one is about the replacing the upper parking lot, parking in an expanded lower lot. The second part is about hotel parking, and the third is about residential parking. So, and the responses kind of ends up being kind of structured that way. So to the first part, the upper parking lot, as it exists today, would be replaced on approximately 1-for-1 basis in an expanded lower parking lot. The current upper lot is on the Morgan parcel on land owned by the Muckleshoot tribe. It sits, and there's an easement that PSE has for that parking. And so for PSE to release that easement, they're going to want replacement parking. The reason the condition is written as approximately 1-for-1 is that we have no way right now of guaranteeing, well, there's two reasons. First, we have no way of guaranteeing they can actually fit 104 or 5 stalls in an expanded lower lot because they haven't actually designed it yet to meet all the city codes for things like how steep can it be, what landscaping do they need to have exactly. And the second reason is that the city's not party to that easement. So the city doesn't have a direct interest in an exact 1-for-1 replacement. We don't want to be involved in that.
Jason, can you speak to, on that lower parking lot, the new parking lot that would be built in exchange for the meadow, to Councilmember Lasay's concerns about the tree removal there? Is it, although the design hasn't been done yet, I think the initial analysis is that the tree removal would be minimum since the alignment or most of that parking lot would be placed on the location of the abandoned Tokel road where it used to come down at a sharp angle and meet the road.
Right, and what the mayor just stated is correct, that most of that parking lot would end up in the former Tokel Road right-of-way, and so there aren't really trees there other than what may have grown in the last 5-ish years. Certainly that would be expanded a little bit wider to accommodate a parking lot versus just a 2-lane road. So the tree impacts are not likely to be severe there. The 3E condition is still going to hold, that where they can't remove trees that are going to suddenly make the hotel visible. And the other thing working in favor here is both topography and also the fact that the lower parking lot is going to be pretty far to the east. So the hotel sits much more north of there, and so you're not really going to, even, you could almost, they're not proposing this, but you could probably remove most of the trees in that area and not affect the view from the falls viewpoints back toward the hotel. The hotel will likely not be visible. That lower parking lot would be owned and or maintained by PSE or the tribe, the Muckleshoot tribe, not the city. There's no scenario on the table where that's a city parking lot. So that's the parking, that's that one.
Councilmember Shipman?
So I thought we had some code regarding parking when it's shared parking. So I would think that we would have some municipal code that would cover this parking as far as adequacy.
We have provisions for shared parking agreements. This isn't that situation. We have testimony in the record that the hotel and commercial aspects of this project will not be parking in this lower parking lot, whatever arrangement
Okay.
there is. So there's no need for a legal shared access or shared parking agreement.
Okay.
In that sense, it's just management of the spaces.
And the code requirement for parking for parks is essentially as determined by the director to be adequate. So we make the general assumption that the parking they have today is sufficient for the use there. As long as they do a near one-for-one replacement, it will continue to be sufficient. So that addresses the code issue for that lot. See,
Councilmember Lissay?
I'm going to get back to parking. As it pertains to the Salish expansion, not necessarily the parking, the other lots. I see that on the matrix, you summarize the calculation for hotel, meeting event space, spa, fitness center, to get to a total of 352 stalls or 440 maximum if you use a commonly used 125%. What's not included here is the outdoor spaces. There's outdoor gathering spaces, outdoor public spaces, outdoor activity spaces. How is this accounting for parking of folks that want to walk through the trees? That or folks visiting residents in the apartments or
So
residents.
So specific to that, there's a multifaceted answer to that, I would say. The first is that the calculation you see in front of you uses, notes specifically that meeting event space and spa fitness centers aren't defined in code, and so we don't have an actual parking ratio for them. I use a 1 per 250 stall ratio, which is the retail stall ratio, which is maybe a bit on the high side, but it's designed. We're trying to say, well, what's the near worst case parking requirement from the code? So there is some parking for the media event space and the spa fitness center. In this case, it totals 170 stalls, so it's not insignificant. The hotel parking is accounted for. If people want to park there and walk through the trees, I guess my suggestion there is it is private property, and the hotel management staff can address that as they will or as they will not. And then residential parking is handled separately. There's a parking requirement for residential that's not, that I don't even lay out here.
What I'm getting at is, and just as a follow-up then, is it's discussed that there's outdoor event space. And that outdoor event space will have events. And those, I presume, will not just be for folks staying at the hotel. It could be for overflow from the indoor event space. It could be a dual where you're using outdoor space and indoor space. So I've got concern that just counting the indoor spaces towards parking is going to be far exceed 400 parking
I think we could
spaces.
address it through the conditions in the MDNS in 2003.
Okay.
There are 3 pertaining to this. 1, provide on-street off-street parking on your project. But it's also transit or transportation management, it's TMD. I do acronyms.
TDM.
TDM. And so for the ratios, you can see that Jason's added some to anticipate the structures and the land uses. And we've related them, and they're conservative in regards to the ratios. Often for those types of uses, you see a ratio of 1 to 400 or 1 to 300, not 250. So the matrix intends to show that they're meeting their off-street parking requirements for the known land uses and structures. Beyond that, if there are special events, that a fun run, a mini concert of that thing, those types of things are not captured in the project design, nor should they be, because then you're overbuilding. But that mitigation measure is designed to capture that. And I believe the environmental document mentions things like buses, jitneys, et cetera. So much like the Boeing Classic parks over at the former mill site and buses people in, it would be a measure like that.
Councilmember Summel?
So I feel like we're spending a lot of time on parking, and I fear that a lot of this is none of our business. As long as they replace the parking that they are, I guess, overtaking by taking the upper parking lot and making that into some sort of a meadow and replacing those one for one at some of the nearby location, whether they have 440 parking spots or 397 on their own property, I'm trying to understand what the negative to the city is if they guessed wrong 3 times a year on a particular event. If they have an event that has overflow parking, that happens. And what they do is they contract with some other open space in the city, like Boeing does, to take that, and they bus people to and from, and that's how it goes, and that happens once, twice, 3, 4 times a year. But I don't understand, I feel like we're micromanaging parking, and as long as it meets the code, I mean, we could spend all night talking about this, and I don't understand why we are.
Councilmember Mayhew?
But
I have a lot of the same thoughts as were just expressed, but I do think, well, I am concerned about traffic problems if they develop spilling over onto city streets. So my belief is the residential area will end up, those streets will be city streets. Is that a reasonable belief?
Most likely, yes.
And Tokel Road is a city street?
Yes, that you can't really park on today because of no shoulders, but yes.
But you can have a lot of congestion on, right? Which our police and our city services would have to deal with. So I think that's where I sort of get focused, is just trying to understand, and maybe this TDM is really the answer to that. Well, it wouldn't, let me say that differently. What I'm worried about is not so much special events, because I imagine they'll solve that. I'm just worried about day to day. So what I'm worried about is if 400 stalls isn't enough, then I'm worried that the effect of that would be that the residential area parking would get used up, potentially negatively impacting the residents there, or that the PSE parking, I don't know if that's a reasonable thing to call it, but the falls parking might get used up. And so I'm just curious in how we're going to make sure those two things happen. I think as long as, from my point of view, as long as I know how those two things aren't going to happen, I'm largely of the view of they'll figure out the rest on their own because it's in their interest to do so.
Councilmember Holloway and then Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, so this is to replace the existing parking, and I agree with you, Sean. I think this is agreement between the two parties, which we are not one of them, to maintain parking for the falls. I will say that if you look today, just based on what you see today, yes, this is insufficient parking for the traffic we get at the peak season for the falls. But I don't think that we can require that kind of parking. It'd be a lot of open space in the rainy season just collecting water. And we'll probably in the future do what we do today of allowing them to park at Railroad Park there and bus them in. So I don't think we can ask for increased parking. It will be insufficient. We'll manage it the way we do today.
Councilmember Shepherd, then Councilmember Mayhew.
So I think we have municipal codes that tell us how much parking we're supposed to provide based on what the use of a facility is. Is there some reason that we would not conform to what our code is as far as parking?
The response in the issue matrix lays out the code, the calculation per the code effectively, and uses a somewhat worst-case scenario by using, as Mr. Hoffman was describing, a high ratio, parking ratio for the meeting event space in the Spa Fitness Center. So by the way it was calculated, this project conforms with the code requirement for parking because it's between minimum requirement is 352 approximately. The maximum is 440. They're at 400.
Okay.
Approximately, plus or minus 5 or 10. So it would comply with the code as shown right now.
Sorry, gentlemen, I'm going to go to Councilmember Ross for a little round robin, give fair time, and we'll come back to Councilmembers Mayhew or Sunwell.
This gets back to the meeting and event space. Now, I recall reading that it could hold up to 300 people at a time. So I guess maybe to put some numbers to it, how frequently are you hoping to have those type of events? I mean, they like weekly or maybe once or twice a year?
There's a sheet that's in the record. I don't have, Mark, I'll have to look for the tab number, but the applicant provided a meeting event analysis, if you will, in that they also walk through what percentage of attendees would likely be hotel guests, and they tried to make this kind of a worst case-ish scenario, so that showed that they're fine, is the short version. Once Mark finds it.
I believe it's in the application materials. I'm looking
No,
for
it's a planning commission thing, because they tried a corrected one. I believe it's in the July, I want to say it's in one of the June meetings for the planning commission, it was provided. And I don't have the tab numbers, because as you can see, I don't have the binder in front of me.
You can look at two places. So if you're in the application materials, tab 2, look at page 7. That has the rough breakdown so that the total number of events don't scare you. It characterizes that overwhelming majority are served by the existing rooms and restaurants. But it does have categories for rather large events. So I would encourage you to read page 7. And then
Where is that, Mark?
if you're in tab 2, this is the application materials. The section B starts on the bottom of page 6, flexible meeting and event space.
Okay.
When you carry over onto page 7, second paragraph, there's the percentage breakdown of the event type.
That original one was revised because the applicant was double counting some things, so it looks way worse than it actually would be. Look, it's in one of the June meetings, I believe. I don't have it. So the applicant handed it to me, which is good, because otherwise we would never find it. They are projecting, let's see, between 50 to 70 small events, which are 1 to 15 total guests, 400 to 560 medium-sized events, which is 16 to 70 total guests, and 50 to 70 large events, which are 70 plus. That yields a range of 500 to 700 total number of events per year. They are assuming 60% of the guests would stay in the hotel and 40% would be day use, so to speak.
Look at tab 19, second page.
And so you can read that analysis. If you have further questions, we should discuss it, but the information is right there.
Okay.
See first.
Councilmembers Mayhew and then Sunwell.
So, just listening to my fellow council members, I'm worried that we're talking at cross purposes. So, in my mind, there's 3 areas of parking that have unique concerns from each other. The first is the falls parking. So this is the new, I believe the term is a lower lot that's going to be built. And I believe that the city does have a significant interest in this. I'm satisfied that replacement at 1-to-1 is a reasonable solution to the city's concern here. But I'm worried that that is only reasonable if that parking remains available for falls parking. If that parking, in fact, is used substantially or entirely for hotel element parking, then I think we will have created a falls parking problem. So my concern is just how we make sure that doesn't happen. And I think that probably can be accomplished, and I don't know if we get into some conditions, but some method that causes the applicant to ensure that, and it seems to me there's a whole number of ways that might be solved, and so I don't want to prescribe what that is, but it seems like they could solve how they're going to make sure that there isn't hotel element parking, or at least not a significant amount of it.
That's where we're at, and so the agreement will come forward. The applicant themselves have stated the hotel users will not park in the lower parking.
Okay, so as long as we ensure that, that seems to solve what I perceive as the falls parking issue. I think that I have a second very similar concern about the residential element parking. Again, if there's overflow such that that's no longer available for residents, then I think that becomes a city problem, because those are going to end up being our city streets. So
And council will have a shot at that during the residential design guidelines, requiring approval by the city for those prior to the preliminary plat.
seems like we could have a shot at it now. Seems like however we solve the falls parking, we could just throw in and potentially the same. I guess it depends how they solve the falls parking, but potentially we could just have that same solution be required for the residential, or perhaps the same solution or something equivalent, something like that. And then lastly is the hotel elements parking, which I think some of this discussion, or a lot of this discussion, has been about. And I think as long as we've protected the falls parking and the residential element parking, the remainder just becomes the hotel's problem, if you will. And I have absolute confidence that they will solve that problem, because it's their guests, it's their, whether it's staying at the hotel or coming to events, I'm sure they will solve that. So I'm really not too worried about that one. So that's, for what it's worth, my point of view on it.
And Councilmember Sunwell.
So my last comment on this issue is roughly in line with Councilmember Mayhew's, and that is, it seems like there are two ways in which this could become the city's problem. And I think it's very easy a very easy solution, not trying to tell you the how, but just to make sure that the falls parking stays separate from the hotel parking, is to not make the hotels accessible by foot to from that parking lot. If people have to bushwhack to get from that parking lot to the hotel, they will not park there. The other thing I want to avoid is I want to make sure we avoid something that does happen at the Snoqualmie Casino. Sometimes during the summer concerts, we have people parked along North Bend Way in very precarious ways. I want to make sure Tokel Road doesn't become that. Now, I haven't done the measurements to see whether it would fit a car or not. My recollection is it would be difficult, but I've seen people in desperate parking situations make difficult look easy. So I'd want to make sure that that is well signed and well enforced, that we're not parking along Tokel Road. And the third is, I think we all seem to share this concern, and I think this is why Mr. Mayhew is suggesting we talk about it now, is if we punt on the residential parking issue, then by not requiring a certain amount of parking up front, then we're stuck, right? So if we don't solve if we believe there's a potential parking issue on this facility, the commercial, well, I'll call it commercial side of this facility, and we don't resolve that now, there is no way to resolve that with the residential piece, because now we're already short. And so now we can sign it, we can put gates, we can pass out permits to, every resident who lives there has to have a sticker in their car, and that's how you know they belong there, but that doesn't seem like an elegant solution.
The way we have it left for residential is there's an assumption it will meet SMC. Whether that's 2 cars in the garage and 1 in the driveway, that'll be specified in the residential design guidelines. There's no deviation or request or any language in here specific to anything less than that. The condition requires those guidelines to come back to the city before the plat.
The city council.
The city council specifically. So I believe we have residential captured with that tool.
But my point, Mark, is if, and I am actually not saying that we don't have enough parking. I'm saying if we're not sure that we don't have enough parking, I'll use numbers. Let's say we come up with 400 parking spots, and it turns out down the road, we really needed 450. And now at residential phase, there's nothing you can do about needing that 50 now that you're at this point, because they're at full build out on the commercial side of things. And so now we have to come up with weirdo ways to enforce parking through stickers or police or all kinds of stuff that costs the city money and the residents inconvenience. Whereas if we get the parking right the first time, then the issue of overflow is taken care of because there's sufficient parking on site.
Now, the second part of my response is specific to recommended condition number 12. It takes out 2 of the MDNS requirements that are already met and goes on to say the mitigation measures specified in the 2003 MDNS are hereby incorporated as conditions. That condition 24 in the MDNS talks about TDM, traffic demand management, could include shuttle bus, van transportation between the hotel, et cetera, guests, trail, et cetera. B is construction of an on-site non-motorized trail system. C is trip reduction measures. So for overflow, that condition would capture it. And then I would just add that there's highly likely there's going to be an HOA or CCNRs and private management of whatever that nightmare could be, and not the city.
Two additional observations. One, just like with the trees, when you're thinking about conditions for parking, try to tailor the conditions to what the evidence in the record shows as opposed to
what could be.
What could be.
Gotcha.
And then vis-a-vis the residential, what I think I hear Mr. Hoffman saying is if you council require 2 to 3 spaces per resident per lot, you then have the residential parking occurring off-street, and you have public rights-of-way that are available for parking. And so the Councilmember Sunwall is talking about like an RPZ, a residential parking zone where you would sticker people. The alternative would be you would have room potentially to allow a certain amount of rare event commercial parking spillover into the residential neighborhood, because a car on the street is a car on the street, you know, whether they're visiting the hotel or visiting, you know, a house down around the corner.
But if you've reduced if you do that and you say a residence has to have 2 parking spots, what you've done, I think, is you've increased the lot size and reduced the number of homes that can be built. And if that's the case, does that bring us out of alignment with what we're required to allow them to build in terms of numbers?
The answer is likely no. The requirement is 2 per unit for a single-family home. In practice, they have 4 because they have a 2-car garage and a driveway that's sufficient to accommodate 2 more cars in most cases. So
okay,
and the word is mostly, because not all the housing types are going to be single-family,
right,
5,000 to 10,000 square foot lots, but that would definitely capture those. But with the required mix that will make it into the residential guidelines it's predominantly those single-family. How it's implemented for condo, townhome, and that type of thing, we haven't seen yet. But the design guidelines will capture that.
Councilmember Mayhew?
So this conversation has taken me from believing that we really didn't have a problem, we just have to put a few safeguards in, to now believing that we have a very, very serious problem, and I'm very concerned. The notion that we have inadequate parking and the plan is to solve it by flooding the residential element, this does not sound like a good plan.
We are not. We're neither suggesting there's inadequate parking nor that the residential area would be flooded.
Okay, so I mean, my street right now, I can't get there's leaves are falling in my street in front of my house. The street sweeper goes by every day and he doesn't sweep in front of my house because there's construction vehicles there, and that's just how that goes. Okay, that's fine. But what if that was every day? So that would be a problem. I don't think we want that kind of a setup. So I hope that's not where we're headed.
Stop saying we have it addressed for almost all occasions, except for that one unknown category that bad things happen. And what we're saying is when they happen, there are provisions that will address it.
Okay, so just for what it's worth, the response, so the things that you mentioned, the TDM and that sort of, I think those sound fantastic to solve. But I don't think they're on point at all to the concern, certainly that I'm raising and that I thought my fellow council member was raising, which is those are solutions I don't think, if we have inadequate parking and we're flooding either residential element or the falls parking, I think that's what we just want to know is how is that, how are we just going to make sure that that doesn't happen? Or is there going to be some kind of no parking? You know, if there was no access, that would solve it, but I don't think that works because I think, in fact, they absolutely need that access because they're moving people back and forth. So the point is there's many ways to solve it. If we just hear how they're going to solve it, I think maybe this goes away. So maybe we're spinning wheels right now.
Well, I think the response here is that the applicant appears to be providing more parking than they need.
That's not apparent to me at all.
But getting back to what the city attorney was stating, that we have to base the decisions on what's available in the record. The record indicates they're going to provide 400 parking stalls approximately. The code appears to say they need roughly 350. And they provide the information about events to demonstrate they're going to have enough parking to accommodate an event and a full hotel.
Okay, so can you get this refined then to reflect what you said? Because actually what I read here, it says not defined in code. Not defined in code. You just told me the code addresses it.
So what I'm saying is that if you look at chapter 17.65 of the code, it has a big table in there. That's the parking chapter of the code. It has a big table in there stating what the parking requirements for different land uses are. What it's saying there is a hotel, per the code, requires 1 stall per hotel room. Meeting an event space is not a defined land use in the parking code, and so what I did instead of applying whatever the code says, because the code says nothing, is apply a very conservative 1 stall per every 250 square feet. That's a ratio that retail uses require. Office uses, for example, require 1 per 300. Warehouses are going to require about 1 per 1,000, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very high, if you will, parking ratio. You're going to get 4 stalls for every 1,000 square feet of built area. Same thing for a spa fitness center, not defined in the code. I applied the retail parking ratio.
No, I accept what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but all due respect, you're not describing the code. You're describing your opinion. Your opinion. It may be a very educated opinion, but it's not in the code. It's your opinion. You just said so.
The code specifically allows the director to make the determination when it's not specified.
And therefore, it's not specified in the code. It's an opinion of an educated director.
There's no direct land use ratio for this category. So what you're seeing in the matrix is an interpretation that we will apply later. The alternative is to say that since it's not expressly written in the code, therefore you do not need parking for meeting event space. We're not saying that.
Well,
what we're saying is that
I'm very concerned now. I wasn't concerned going in, but now I'm very concerned.
Well, I'll let you know where staff's at. 105 spaces are up top. Those will be replaced for false parking down below, hopefully in a 1-to-1 or more ratio. The commercial aspect of this project is proposing 400 parking spaces where 352 are called for by code. The residential has every expectation of providing off-street parking in a ratio in conformance with Snoqualmie Municipal Code. And we're offering that the mitigation measures in the SEPA document for TDM and motorized trail address the need, and this project will be adequately parked.
And I'll go one step further, and there's no evidence in the record that I'm aware of, and nobody's pointed to anything to suggest that the meeting or spa space generates parking demand in excess of the retail standard that these folks have applied based on their professional opinion. Someone could have done that. They could have come to the hearing and said, you're proposing this number of parking spaces. Here's my data that shows that's not enough. We don't have any evidence in the record that says the standard they're using is not sufficient.
I would offer one more thing that might give a little more comfort to the council, and that is I spent last week, in fact, for the past few years, I've been tracking the autonomous vehicle conversations at conferences and spent half a day at one last week. And part of the, and those technologies are projected to be rapidly adopted within the next 5 to 10 years. And one of the outcomes of that is a projection that there will be a tremendous decrease in the demand for public parking spaces. I mean, parking structures in downtown urban cores and so forth, or even these places, since a lot of those vehicles. So that might sound a bit abstract, but it might be something to consider anyway. Councilmember Shepherd.
Do we have an illustration with the parking and the buildings? Can you tell me which tab to look at? Because I see a couple of things that show parking, but it doesn't say definitively that that's...
Tab 4 will have those drawings.
What? Tab 4?
Tab 4 will have those. I couldn't tell you exactly what page in that tab because there's a whole lot of drawings, but they're in there. There's one site plan in there. There's the conceptual kind of overhead view that's computer generated.
I'm more or less looking for, what does the footprint look like for the parking and the buildings, and where's the edge of the property?
Yeah, the site plan will have that, which is in there. There you go.
Of course, more parking means less trees and significant trees potentially, right?
I'm sorry, there I go.
The one on your left I believe, is the right one.
Councilmember Ross and then Councilmember Sunwell.
So looking at the total number of parking, you have spa and fitness center has its own stalls. And my guess is those are most likely people staying at the hotel? Or are you going to have private memberships, for instance, that people can come and go from the city?
I think you're going to see a mix of both. I can't speak to what the applicant's exact plans are, but so far they've indicated, it's likely going to serve predominantly hotel guests, but you could certainly come for a day and get a spa treatment of whatever kind you choose. So it'll be both.
Okay, I was wondering.
Which is part of the reason why our staff's educated determination is that it needs a separate parking requirement.
Right, okay.
Councilmember Sunwell.
The code does not define anything for a spa or fitness center. When the YMCA parking lot was determined, what code did we use to determine how many spots? 'Cause I would consider that to be a fitness center. What code do you know, Mark, what we used to determine?
Snoqualmie Ridge 1 refers back to the parking in Snoqualmie Municipal Code, SMC.
Okay. So if
And I could add to that, Councilmember Sunwell, the YMCA has data on their facilities all through the region that are much more precise than the code we have, and they chose to voluntarily overbuild the parking anyway.
So let's say, for argument's sake, Mark, that you guys are going to, somehow we needed a bunch of municipal code on what meeting and event space. Let me back up. Let's say we decided to define in the code what a meeting and event space would require, what ratios would require for parking. How would that be determined?
That's a code amendment that the planning commission would consider first. They'd make a recommendation to the city council, and the council would consider and adopt an ordinance to amend the code.
Would you guys be involved in that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess where I'm going with this is, in response to a prior comment, is while yes, we are relying upon your expert opinion, if a code were to be confirmed or created, it would largely depend on that same expert opinion that we have in the city to largely determine that code, right?
Yes, to some extent.
Okay. So we'd be talking to the same two people who are making this statement today.
Yeah, but it would be even easier than that because parking ratios are faced by every city and jurisdiction. It's not like we would be looking at it freshly.
Okay, thank you.
There are industry standards. I don't know that we would do the analysis to vary, for instance, and this is just by example, instead of 1 to 250, 1 to 255. There's an industry standard for uses, and it's just easier to use those.
So you developed the parking based on an industry standard already? Or is this it?
The code section is an adopted ordinance, and it was not an analysis specific to land uses in the city of Snoqualmie. They're commonly used ratios that are faced by any given use in any city. So in that regard, they're not unique, but they fit uses and what we need here.
So if we went to a meeting and event space, I mean, I'm sure there's some in Issaquah, or there's some in Bellevue, or other places. What standard did they use when they created their meeting and event space?
Depends on the event space and the type and the location. Are we talking about a coliseum, or are we talking about a small pub? And so the ratio adopted by the city takes that factor and makes it local that way. The ratio of what those land uses are, whether you use standard traffic definitions or standard traffic generation models, they're pretty basic. So I would encourage that ours is conservative based on 1 to 250 because it's retail to address this unknown, but that you can see in the fiscal analysis and the events description, that we're not talking about a White River amphitheater or a IMAX multiplex. These are overflow events that are captured by the mitigation measures for this specific hotel project. Hotel projects in general are not controversial in the ratio. You know, every city is going to be slightly different. Some city may use 1 to 400, depending on when they adopted the code. Some may be 1 to 350 because their code's 20 years old. Changes over time, but there's no, once it's applied in code, there's no magic to it. What we're saying is this is the mix that we see to fit to address the parking issue for this site.
I think the city attorney had something to add here.
Just by way of comparison, just to give you something to benchmark the use of the retail, the 1 per 250 square foot standard against. So as indicated in the matrix, applying that standard to the meeting event space yields 103 stalls. Table 1 in our code has a category for social, fraternal clubs, lodges, etc., which is 1 per 4 persons. The meeting and event space per the development agreement is supposed to serve events up to 275 people. So 1 per 4 at 275 would be fewer than 70 stalls. Same standard, restaurants and taverns, 1 per 4 persons. High schools, 1 per 5 students. So many of the other standards for other uses that might generate large events have a much lower yield a lower parking total than would the standard that the staff had proposed here.
Councilor Melissay and then Councilor Sunwell.
I don't want to get in a back and forth on this, but I actually went and looked up assembly spaces in a zoning code. And City of Bellevue popped up, so I looked at City of Bellevue. And I chose outside of their downtown core because it's a much more dense situation. Their basis for auditorium, assembly room, exhibition hall, theater, and commercial recreation, which is I think what we're talking about, I think that fits what we're looking at, is 10 per 1,000 square feet. That would be 1 per 100 square feet. So I think the idea
But that's that's another city's code, not our code.
Right. Well, if we're going to talk about comparing.
I was comparing standards in our code, other available categories that these two gentlemen might have.
So point of order, I'm
recommended.
concerned we're going outside the record. And I don't know what the legal opinion is on this, but I'm not sure the Bellevue City Code is part of the record. And so I'm concerned that we're going outside the record.
Then I'll just make my statement the same way Jim, the other council member made his statement, is I am seriously concerned that there's not enough parking for this development.
Councilor Sunwell.
So we've spent more than 45 minutes on parking spots, which actually might be a record in the last month, which is saying something. At some point, we're on page 3 of 19. I don't know what else, and I have spoken a lot on this topic, but at some point, we need to move on to the other 16 pages of items that we requested last week, and I just don't know. I feel like we've reached a dead end on this particular topic, and I don't know if I have agreement on that, but I'd like to move on to whatever the next topic is.
Well, if I could just ask, is there a majority of the council that's recommending some sort of a condition or change here? Because I have no idea what you'd want Jason or the staff to work on or bring back. Or is it just a general ask, can you just go back and reevaluate those numbers, maybe in a conversation with the developer and see if he wants to come back with another 100 stalls and 300 less trees or something like that?
As long as you can't see it from the platform.
Councilmember Mayhew.
I just suggest that maybe staff reflect on our comments. I strongly encourage them to talk to the developer. I have a suspicion that the developer has some answers to this that might help us get out of this.
Yeah,
we'll see.
That's helpful, thank you. So we'll just have them have a conversation and come back with more information that hopefully will satisfy the council's concerns. Everybody all ready to move on? Yes. All right, next.
Okay, number 3, page number 3. Describe the land uses envisioned for the site and then also clarify what the managed residential units are. So the first part of the response lays out what the project entitlement is per the development agreement. So it's up 250 hotel rooms, the meeting space, restaurant, recreation facility, 175 residential units. And then the managed residential units are townhouse-style condominium units attached to the hotel. They're part of the hotel's entitlement, not the residential entitlement. The number is unspecified. physical limitations are going to come into play here. They can only fit so many on the site, of course, within a lot of other constraints. The master plan carries this further and much more firmly defines the project as envisioned. So the master plan proposes up to 182 hotel rooms, the conference event space, the spa and lounge that we've mentioned, and between 30 and 60 of those managed residential units, and then up to 150 residential units. So the master plan approval, should of course you approve it, would be limited to that. So we're not talking they're suddenly going to come back with 150 managed residential units. They're going to be limited to the 30 to 60 that they've specified here. Mayor, I believe you have a couple.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Holloway.
All right, so I believe the managed residential units was my question, and I feel the answer was sufficient. So, no further questions for me on regards to that. In regards to the original question of what are the intended land use, I believe the staff response on 9.6 defines that out and is sufficient. I have no objections from closing this one out.
Councilmember Ross and Councilmember Shepherd and Councilmember Mayhew. Councilmember Ross.
So I do have a question. It says the number of these units is not limited by the development agreement, but then if you look at tab 2, page 6, it states managed residential component is proposed for a later phase of the hotel development, a separate complex of up to 30 townhome-style condominiums adjacent to the main hotel will provide additional guest units.
Right. So that's what I was referring to, where the development agreement does not limit the number of managed residential units, but the master plan is proposing a specific number. So in this case, so they hypothetically, the applicant could have proposed, say, 150 managed residential units as part of the hotel. They didn't do that. They said they're going to build between 30 and 60. So the master plan approval, should you do that, would limit the number of those units to 60 effectively.
But didn't we agree on the development agreement?
The development agreement has no limit.
It does.
For those.
Wait, point of clarification. Is a managed residential unit a hotel room or a residential unit or a third category?
Third category.
Condominium. It's called condominium in the DA.
So it is
They're
not
not a fourth
constrained by the
category.
175 residential units.
It is not constrained by the residential unit cap of 175, nor is it constrained by the 250 hotel room cap in the development agreement. There, it is unconstrained. Now, that's step one. Step two is the master plan. The applicant has now defined their project a little more. They've narrowed the options. They're proposing fewer residential units, fewer hotel rooms, and they're actually specifying a number of managed residential units. So, while it is simultaneously true that the development agreement does not specify a limit on the number of managed residential units, and the master plan is specifying that they will build between 30 and 60.
It does specify a limit, 30.
Between 30 and 60.
I must be like, where else should I look?
Tab 2 is the 30 or 60 is a difference in how the applicant would construct phase 3 of the hotel development. So phase 1 is roughly half the hotel rooms. Phase 2 is the spa. Phase 3 is either the remaining hotel rooms, the other half, or 60, or, okay, let me back up. Phase 3 would be either the other half of the hotel rooms and 30 managed residential units, 30 condos, or it would be 60 condos. Does that make more sense?
So where should I look for that then?
That would be on it's on one of the phasing plans, which I don't have.
Minute.
The phasing plan, tab 4. Tab 4.
In Jason, another way, it's, all the total numbers are still below the original mixed-use final plan agreements of a combination of hotel rooms at 250 and homes at 175, is it not?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So that's kind of it's sort of a hybrid.
Actually, I don't see it on the phasing plan here because it says that 89 hotel rooms and 30 managed residential units, but it is described somewhere in the application materials that phase 3 would consist of either 89 hotel rooms and 30, or it would or 60.
Councilmember Shepherd.
So I'm looking on page 4 of from tab 2, Salish Lodge spa expansion. So you're saying this says 182 rooms and 30 hotel managed condos and 150 residential units. Is it consistent through all the documents what those numbers are? Are we getting various numbers in various places?
The different numbers come from different, so like I said before, the development agreement has specific limits which are different from what's in the master plan. The master plan is consistent throughout, where they're talking about, 150 homes, and they may not even build that many. They could get a master plan approval for 150 and end up building 100 in a hypothetical situation. So quickly back to Councilmember Ross's question, page 14 of tab 2 has the phasing laid out, and it tells you what the elements and the different phases are. To Councilmember Shepherd's question, the master plan has been consistent throughout, and while the details of what phase 3 would consist of are maybe, if you will, buried slightly because it's only really shown on this one page, that's also been consistent. Staff has been consistent in their understanding with the applicant throughout this process of what they're proposing.
Councilmember Sunwald, then Councilmember Holloway, and Councilmember Mayhew.
I want to make sure I understand the terminology here. So the development agreement is kind of the oldest thing, right? It's what was possible under the original entitlement, correct?
Correct.
And then the master plan is what they've, based on the development agreement, said, okay, yeah, we can do 250 hotel rooms, but we really don't want to. We're going to do this. And these are the actual amount of homes we want to build, more, give or take. And now we've put definition around something that had no definition, which was these managed condos, right? So is it fair to say that the master plan is the governing plan that we're moving forward with?
Yes,
not the development plan?
Yes, it is.
Correct.
Okay.
And you can see in the Planning Commission's recommended condition number 3, where it talks about what is substantial conformance, it talks about what the limits are.
So if we approve this, we would be approving the master plan, which means they would not later be able to go back and say, hey, those extra 68 hotel rooms, we want those back.
Correct.
Okay.
They would have to come back to the council for a master plan amendment or a new master plan at that point.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So you would
That
have
helps.
another chance to discuss that, if they wanted to do that.
I'm sure that would take a while.
Just a moment, if I understand the math, I mean, I'm just looking at the original agreements that we've done over the years, has allowed for 250 rooms, 175 homes for 425, let's just call them units combined, whereas now the current plan.
Point of order, Mayor, what are you reading from?
I'm just doing the numbers that I've been familiar with all over.
But they're not the numbers that are in the agreement, so I'm just trying to figure out what you're reading from.
Oh, the 250 and 175 I'm doing from memory that I know is.
That's the development agreement.
In the development agreement, I'm sorry.
Dated 2004, the original development agreement, which says 250 and 110? Not
No,
more
no,
than-
the
no,
amended
no.
and restated development. The
You're reading the
current-
amended, not the original, the
That's-
Well, the
amended.
most recent version of the
Currently in
development
effect.
agreement.
That's
yeah.
what I wanted to
Oh, I'm
understand.
sorry, okay, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
In other words, before they entered into this process coming forward to the Planning Commission and Council, they were allowed to build a combined 425 units of these pieces. But now the current proposal is 185 hotel rooms, 30 of the hybrid condominium hotel condo units or residential units, and 150 homes for 365. So even at that, they're still well below the 425, even if they exercise the other, that's why I think you put a threshold of 60. Anyway, I just thought that was helpful for me to just sort of frame those comparative numbers in terms of impact on traffic and all the other issues, to do that kind of comparison. Councilmembers Holloway and Mayhew, did you guys negotiate who was going to go first? Or all right, Holloway and then
Me? You. Okay, so, I'm sorry, guys. I think you led us down a wrong path. Okay, if we go to tab 2, page 2, second paragraph, allows for condominium units as part of hotel, not counted as part of maximum allowable residential units. So that says the managed residential units are in the hotel count. You can also go to page 14, phase 3, it says 60 managed units in lieu of hotel rooms. So I think you misstated when you said this was a third category, not controlled by residential and hotel units. You are in disagreement with your development agreement, or at least what's been tab 2 here. Now, given what Matt said, we're below the numbers anyway, but I just want to make clarification.
Right.
I don't think we have a third category here.
well, it's a weird It's a weird hybrid category, we weren't sure where to put, I mean, they obviously proposed it. You're right, if you put it in the residentials, they'd be over by 5.
If you're doing it in lieu of hotel units, it's controlled by the hotel unit.
The bottom line is, the council,
Bottom lines were below.
the council controls whether you want to look at their actual specific master plan and say that this somehow completely blows up and violates the development agreement. Or since it's still well below, the total counts are still well below the numbers. And
Which page was the second one you referenced, Brian? I'm
Page
sorry.
14, where we show the phasing.
Thank you.
Phase 3, 60 managed residential units in lieu of hotel rooms.
The way the,
If my count's accurate, there's still 60 units below
I
the
have,
the totals, you
I
know.
have no argument we're below the numbers. I have argument that I was led into a conversation I didn't need to be led into.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Just one point and one quick question, which maybe we defer this to a different phase, but the quick point I'll make is on your traffic count, you guys forgot the condos. So just something, as you're re-looking at it's not traffic count, on the parking count. You forgot the condos, just, so anyway, my question is condominium, and it's exempt from affordable housing. And I believe that is largely because of what we were just talking about, which it came out of the hotel side of this. And that's where these condominium units sort of notion originated. But it's exempt from affordable housing. And I just want to understand, so if we want to save that for another time when we're talking about affordable housing, that's fine with me. But I just want to understand why that's exempt. So, for example, how do we know these condominiums really aren't residential units? So maybe they aren't going to let people stay there more than 30 days, or, you know, how it is it that we're going to know these really aren't residential units, and therefore we're comfortable that was exempted from the affordable housing?
I'll give you the short answer, which is because the development agreement says so. It says 15% of the total number of residential dwelling units, excluding condominium units within the hotel, if any.
Right, so that's not going to get anywhere because you don't define condominium units anywhere in any of these agreements. So I think you're going to be back to my question. And I think the simple solution is if they're really just not being used as residential units and we can just understand that, then my question goes away. So you don't have to answer now, if you could just find out on that.
And is the staff able to answer quickly if the developer did omit parking calculations of due to the condominium impact?
Certainly, I didn't count them, so I'll correct that, but it,
I don't know if that's going to change the outcome of that conversation. I wanted to bring that to their attention.
Okay, all right,
We don't have a number. The categories, we'll bring it back.
very good. Councilman Lissay?
I don't want to rediscuss all the issues. I think that based upon the items of the master plan, what they're asking for is less than what was originally agreed to in the development agreement, in the amended and restated development agreement. There's also one other spot that creates a little bit of clarity that just for understanding is that on that same section, tab 2, page 6, second paragraph from the top, talks about a separate complex of up to 30 townhome-style condominiums adjacent to the main hotel will provide additional guests. So there's 3 different places that refer to the managed residential units in different ways. I think it'd be worth just a clarification to make sure that we've got it squared away, that we know exactly how many it's going to be, because in one place we say 30, one place we say 30 or 60, the other place we say it could be hotel rooms or 30 or 60. It'd be good just to put that to rest. My question really is still around the managed residential units, and Councilmember Mayhew did touch on that, is that I believe if it's townhouse-style condominiums that are managed, I would assume more like as hotel rooms, that then they have to abide by the covenants and ordinances in the municipal code that limit the amount of stay, the time you can stay at a hotel. I believe we have a 30-day limit in the city, if I remember right from the hotel discussion previously. But I'd like you to look that up and make sure we have that confirmed, that there is a limit, because it does go to affordable housing. It does go to whether they're defined as residences. And if someone's staying for a long-term managed location, that I have some concerns of whether that becomes a residence or not. Mainly around my personal experience, because that's how I got away with staying overseas for long-term when I was an expat, and was able to list it as it was a managed residence, and therefore it was not a permanent residence. and therefore I was not subject to having to get residence visas and those sorts of things. So it's something I have in my experience. It's just something I want to get clarified.
Is there a statute of limitations on that?
I abided by the laws and regulations of the Federation of I won't even say it. We'll just not get into that.
So, Jason, so we can just get clarification from the developers whether they
Yeah,
intend
make
this
sure
to be
we're
like
clear.
a residence inn type product, or whether it's actually a
Yeah, and there is some additional information somewhere in the record that we'll find. The applicant has spoken to this issue before the planning commission before.
And the question really is because we don't have a definition of it. We don't have any way to define it. It's a new use within the city, so therefore we're in uncharted territory that way, and knowing what it really
Jason
is.
did point out the applicable provision of the development agreement, which is Table 2 of the amended and restated, and it excludes condominium units from the affordable housing calculation, and it excludes it from the residential cap in Table 2 for houses. So even if they are more like residences, the limitations of the development agreement on residences don't apply to them.
But where do we define condominium unit, though?
I don't know that we do, but even if these are like residences, they're not subject to the affordable housing or the residential cap in Table 2 because the development agreement specifically says so.
As far as the definition of condominium, we would either have one in the municipal code, or else there's also a section, or rather, probably a whole chapter of state law concerning condominiums. So it's
Right.
not that we don't know what they are.
Right, they are defined in the RCW.
Councilmember Mayhew. Yes, Councilmember Mayhew.
I'm just trying to process something that sounded completely wrong to me. I'm just going to ignore it. I was going to ask if the city attorney knows if I call the tail on a dog a leg, how many legs does a dog have? The answer is 4. So a condominium,
Calling
if it's
a tail a leg
undefined.
doesn't make it a leg,
Exactly.
according to
So-
Abraham Lincoln.
So just trying to bring some levity to the idea of, my concern on the affordable housing is we wouldn't want to have this, I don't think I'm assuming no one intends this agreement to be getting around our affordable housing requirements. So my guess is that if we just get some clarity on what this term condominium, or it's called different things, different places, townhome, if we just get some clarity on how this is going to be used, I think this concern may go away very quickly. So let's just do that instead of getting balled up in legs and tails and condominiums and residential units and all that. If that makes sense.
Bob, you're suggesting we can only go by what's written in the record or the development agreement? We can't jump out to some code or definition of a condo, or what's, maybe you could.
No, what I was trying to suggest is I don't think that it matters whether it's called a residential unit or a condominium if it's located in the hotel, and that's what the development agreement says. Condominium units located in the hotel are not subject to the residential cap in Table 2 and aren't subject to the affordable housing percentage. So
maybe it's
it
just,
doesn't matter what we call it. If it's in the hotel, then it's out of that calculation.
Call it a hut, doesn't matter.
But in the drawings, it shows it as a separate building, so it's not in the hotel. Or maybe I don't know what in the hotel means.
Within the hotel component of the development.
Hotel
if you-
component.
part of the hotel.
If you want to divide into a hotel component and
Anyway,
a residential component,
My
that's how
concern,
we
I'm
treat it.
guessing my concern is going to be solved once you tell us what the stay.
And perhaps in a
limitations
matrix,
are.
just provide the reference to the chapter and verse in the development agreement so the council can look at that themselves. Councilmember Shepherd?
So where does our requirement for affordable housing come from as far as the 15%?
It comes from
The development agreement.
It's specifically in this development agreement. Historically, it was the same 15% requirement is in the Snoqualmie Ridge 1 and 2 development agreements, and the Kimmel Creek Village development agreement, and this one.
So it doesn't come from external to the city at all? No RCW or Growth Management Act or
It's a
anything like that?
negotiated aspect of the development agreements, this being the third one that you're familiar with.
It's a component required by the Growth Management Act, but the Growth Management Act is not very specific on what that looks like in individual jurisdictions. So the SR1 became sort of the template that was created out of whole cloth years ago, and we've essentially adopted that language for subsequent developments. it sort of set the precedent, and so it really originated from there. I mean, as I understand, we've been higher in those percentages and requirements than most communities, so. Councilman Lissay.
I'll let others have more. I think we're just at a point on this one where a few more definitions.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to wind this up too. I think we're about.
Is all we really need. I don't think there's an objection to what's been proposed in the master plan, just a little more definition, make sure we're clear that there's some conflicting verbiage in different sections, just to make sure we understand that there's understanding in what is being proposed.
Okay.
And flexibility is okay. I don't have an objection to flexibility, as long as that we stay within what's in the development agreement and what's being proposed.
All right, it feels like we've kind of exhausted that particular item. Is everybody ready to move on? Okay.
All right, number 4, views and visual impacts. So the original question is describe any views from the site, first of all, and then potential visual impacts from off-site, including from Snoqualmie Falls. So I know we've discussed the potential visual impacts from Snoqualmie Falls from TCP, so hopefully we've gotten that one. As far as views from the site, there's nothing really describing what views there may or may not be from the site. A lot of it depends on exactly how buildings are oriented and placed, what trees are or aren't removed. So, it comes down to you kind of have to use your imagination maybe, but it's hard to speak to what specific views there would or wouldn't be at this point. There's also no criteria about views from the site, so that's why there's really no condition about it, or much discussion of it, frankly.
Okay, I'm going to be daring here, Council, and suggest that we sort of exhausted this topic prior on the tree discussion. Can we move on?
Right, I agree.
Right, if there's no objection?
Yes.
Okay.
Traffic?
Traffic. Original question, describe the traffic analysis done for the project, describe the access to the site, and also describe potential traffic impacts. Further discussion asked if the traffic studies address the I-90 SR18 interchange. So there's a very lengthy answer here, the short version of which is to say there was a significant traffic study done back in 2001 to 2003, which formed the basis, one of the bases at least, for the mitigated determination of non-significance, the SEPA review issued in 2003. It had some specific mitigation measures. The traffic study was updated in 2015 for the Tokel Roundabout project because, of course, that changes a lot of the assumptions that go into the traffic for this project. Both of those studies looked at impacts to the interchange. At the time that was studied, those impacts were minor. As far as potential...
By interchange, you mean the I-90 SR18?
Correct.
Okay. And the 2015 study, was that largely a validation of the prior one to see if anything had significantly changed, or what was the...
Correct, and it validated the original study, and the city's independent traffic consultant confirmed that at the time. So, for further information, I reference the Planning Commission's issue matrix because there's a fairly lengthy answer on that. It's both about traffic and also about SEPA review and how, without specific factual information to call the SEPA review into question to show that conditions have changed, we are obligated to use the SEPA review as done. So since the information we have says it's confirming it, the SEPA is fine.
Councilmember Sunwell.
So 2 questions, and it seems like we got into this a little bit when we were talking about Snoqualmie Hills West. And there was a lot of, and even to some degree with the signal thing we're putting in the Hawk signal. The traffic studies that we put in the city are 15+ years old. And that oftentimes is a source of contention among those who don't like what the traffic, don't like a particular development that might potentially impact that. Can you answer why these traffic studies kind of always seem to kind of pan out, even though they're 15 years old? And B, would it be fair to say that the reason the I-90 SR18 interchange didn't really change anything, just as it didn't with the other hotel going in right now, is because of the traffic patterns of this particular type of development?
Use.
So to take your questions, so I need to be careful not to speak outside the record here. We have the traffic studies, and as part of, for example, the Snoqualmie Ridge agreements, we have had some ongoing traffic monitoring to say, well, are the studies accurate? The general result of those is that the studies were actually overblown, so to speak. The traffic is better than anticipated, with the sole exception of the interchange. The interchange is far worse than anybody ever dreamed of, but that has generally been determined to be the fault, if you will, of regional traffic patterns, not necessarily development specific to Snoqualmie. So it's kind of it's one of those weird issues where traffic, say, on the Parkway is way better than we thought it would be until you get down the hill. So what that means to us is that our traffic modeling is good, so to speak. But we can't anticipate things happening in Maple Valley, things happening down in North Bend, things happening in Auburn, or even down in Issaquah. So does that kind of answer your question?
I guess I marvel at how accurate these things are. They're 15 plus years old, and it just tells me that the science is so solid on traffic studies, whether you're in Kansas City or Snoqualmie, that, I guess I'm glad we did a 2015 update to show us what we kind of probably already knew, but.
Yeah, I want to emphasize the study doesn't show that there will be no impact on the interchange. There will definitely, this project would definitely add traffic, mostly to the Tokel roundabout, but it definitely would add traffic at the interchange. It's not significant relative to the amount of traffic that's there even 15 years ago. Certainly it's not significant at this point, but the studies do capture that effect.
Okay.
I doubt anybody's going to see it if this project gets built because traffic's so bad there, but it is captured.
Council, just as a quick check-in, we have about 3 more minutes before I have to adjourn the meeting because they need 10 minutes to set up and swing over, get ready for the council meeting. So we need to conclude. You're on item number 5 out of 27, so
We're close.
I'll do my best to try, yeah, we're very close, to try and move things along next time, but we'll need to press along. Councilmember, so we only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more quick questions, or if you could be succinct. Councilmember Ross?
Okay, so items number 27, well, on the traffic part, it states pay a pro rata share of cost to improve I-90 SR18 interchange. And then it, kind of talks about improvements that were done. So did they already pay into this, the pro rata share?
No, they never did because Washout fully funded that project.
Oh, okay.
So the city didn't pay, the Muckleshoot, or rather Gateway Cascades at the time did not pay. It was a state-funded improvement.
So there's a potential in the future that they'll pay, or there's?
No, the condition's been, if you will, it's fulfilled to the extent that it's no longer necessary. So because the mitigation was tied to a specific improvement, which is what the mitigations are,
Right.
There's no vehicle to take that money and apply it to some other project because that impact has been mitigated. We can't make them pay for a different impact.
Okay. And I guess one other thing, it looks like the Salish expansion, if approved, would be completed late 2022. Is that correct?
The hotel component, yes.
Okay. And the, I think the latest email we saw from Senator Mullet was that the I-90 interchange would be completed by 2023. So there might be, sometimes there'd be additional
correct.
traffic, but however, the fix is coming. So.
Correct.
And it's important to note that the interchange improvements discussed back then are different than the ones, the divergent diamond that we're talking about now, because of those regional issues. The other importance is these traffic analysis are based on the maximums in the development agreement, and the current master plan is well under those maximums.
All right. Councilmember Shepherd, you have about 45 seconds. The last questions and responses, be brief.
So the response about this traffic, I'm not really confident with. They actually counted traffic in 2001, which was before a lot of SR1 was built. And when they did it again in 2015, they made assumptions. They didn't do a count. So I think that the assumptions that they made for 2015 were only based on what actually is supposed to be planned for this development, not what everything else is happening around it. So I'm not confident that this traffic study is sufficient.
Not sure there's a question in there, but since the project hasn't substantially changed since the original analysis, we're using the existing SEPA document.
And to Councilmember Sunwell's question too, I mean, INRIX is one of the major traffic analysis, or like when you pull out your phone and do the maps and it shows the ongoing traffic is, it's, 5 minutes ahead of you, congested or whatever else, it's pinging off a cell phone. So it's a scary amount of granular data that goes into these analyses that they've collected well over a decade now. And so to your question, Councilmember Sunwell, there's a great deal of specificity and granular data and accuracy in many of these estimates based on the uses that they can analyze. Councilman Lissay, you got 10 seconds?
Yeah, I was just going to propose that we start the next meeting with this item at number 5, just to close it out as opposed to jumping ahead.
Very good. Okay, with that, we are adjourned. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock sharp.